Are you ready for the Son of Man? Allow me to introduce myself. I am Paul Bonfilio. I would like to tell you a bit about Jesus. If the historical Jesus was crucified and this in fact caused his death, then the granted known historical facts, known by even the most critical secular scholars, would point to the real historical event known as the resurrection. In this video, I'll perform a short judicial investigation using the minimal facts approach. Today's investigation, I'll point to the historical and circumstantial evidence for the resurrection. What I'll present has already been granted by even highly critical secular scholars known as significant events, leaving no doubt for the actual historical event itself. I will keep the main thing. First, Jesus was crucified and this caused his death. The historical Jesus was born in the 1st century to a couple from Nazareth. The great Bible historian and author Luke explains that Jesus was born to a couple, Joseph and Mary, in the city of David. It is essential to note this city is also known as Bethlehem. Luke's book, The Gospel According to Luke, was published in Jerusalem AD 63 to 68. Almost notably, Luke's books have been proven reliable amongst archaeologists and historians. We learn the historical Jesus was in fact a carpenter, taking after his father Joseph. And his most celebrated life events began as Jesus moved into his 30s. The 1st century Roman historian Flavius Josephus, in his book Antiquities of the Jews, published his work in Rome in about the year 93-94 AD. He is quoted as saying, "And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those who loved him did not forsake him." Essentially, what Josephus goes on to say is that the historical Jesus is the Christ and he was crucified, no doubt. Even the blasphemous author of the Jesus Seminar and critical Bible scholar Dominic Crossan is quoted by A2ZQuotes.com, where he admits, "Jesus' death by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate is as sure as anything. For if no follower of Jesus had ever written anything for 100 years after his crucifixion, we would still know about him not amongst his supporters. Their names are Flavius Josephus and Cornelius Tacitus." This speaks to the authenticity of the crucifixion from outside biblical textual criticism. Next, the burial and post-mortem appearance. The 1st century Jewish burial practices are described well by the author John, who published the Gospel According to John. This book was published in Jerusalem dating back to 85 to 90 AD. And John, chapter 19, verses 39 through 41, says this, "And there also came Nicodemus, which at first came to Jesus by night and brought a mixture of myrrhs and aloes, about 100 pounds. Then he took the body of Jesus and wound it in linen cloths with the spices, as the manner of Jews is to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre where was man yet never laid." The known historical facts. It is suggested by Gary Habermas, the world's leading authority on the resurrection, that Jesus' disciples believed they had encountered the resurrected Christ. In the book, The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus, published by Kregel Publications, Grand Rapids, Michigan, 2004, Habermas and co-author Michael Licona write, "There is a virtual consensus among scholars who study that Jesus' resurrection was, and subsequent to Jesus' death by crucifixion, his disciples really believed that he appeared to them risen from the dead. Habermas declares that the disciples claimed that Jesus appeared to them the Sunday after the crucifixion, and they were radically transformed. Although surrounded by enemies, they realized they were under penalty of death themselves, but they would see how emboldened they would become proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus from the dead." Next, let's take a written statement from a proclaimed enemy of the 1st century Christian movement. And let's hear what he has to say. In his conversion, the Apostle Paul, formerly Saul of Tarsus, in the letter to the church at Corinth in 1 Corinthians 15, 8 through 9, was published in Ephesus at about 59 AD. Paul writes, And last of all, he was seen of me as one born out of due time. For I am the least of the apostles, that I am not met to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church. In this statement, Paul aligned himself with his conversion, in which Paul had firsthand experience with the resurrected Jesus. Paul's firsthand account as an enemy is of primary importance for Christianity. When your enemy defects to your side and becomes the most prolific author of the Bible, the impact is enormous. The factual and circumstantial evidence for the resurrection is enough to prove that there is no doubt that the resurrection of Jesus is an actual historical event. Number 1, he was crucified, and this caused his death. Number 2, he was buried outside the old city walls of Jerusalem. Number 3, the disciples, they believed they had seen him the Sunday after the crucifixion alive. Number 4, the empty tomb. Number 5, Saul of Tarsus has an experience with the risen Jesus on the road to Damascus and has a conversion experience. Then there's the circumstantial evidence. 1, the church is still alive and well in the 21st century. 2, church is held on Sunday, the day that Jesus rose from the grave. 3, followers are baptized as a sign to the world that they've had a spiritual birth. 4, the church partakes in a given ordinance of communion. And 5, the changed lives of those around the world, of every tribe, nation, and tongue, has in effect changed the world around them. Today, the empty tomb is outside the old walls of the city of Jerusalem, and it's where the garden tomb is located. In 2018, I left MJC 2 weeks before finals week, and I flew to the Middle East. I spent 2 weeks traveling the nation of Israel, and at one of my stops, I entered the garden tomb. As far as I'm concerned, this place has the most substantial evidence for the burial place of Jesus. And I can attest the tomb is empty today and that Jesus is no longer in the grave. If the facts prove the resurrection story is true, then it is every man's, woman, and child's duty to perform their own judicial investigation into the life of Jesus. If you have any questions about the life of Jesus, please don't hesitate to ask me privately. I will look forward to getting to know you all, and I hope to see you all throughout this semester.